Good afternoon, and welcome to this press conference following the Foreign Affairs Council of Defense. The HRVP will be giving you the outcome of today's Foreign Affairs Council, and we'll be taking a few questions. HRVP, you have the floor.
Good morning. Today was not the Foreign Affairs Ministers who deserve a rest after 4 meetings in a week. Today I convened the defense ministers because at the end, in practical terms, and once the political decision was taken yesterday, is a matter of defense policy, and it's up to the defense ministers to implement these measures and to use this funding. The first purpose of this meeting was to assess the evolution of the military situation on the ground, and the military staff of the European Union have provided us with a value assessment of this situation, gathering all the intelligence information that the Member States contribute to our assessment and awareness of the situation. Certainly, the military campaign, the Russian military campaign, is becoming more and more ruthless, and the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting back with courage. Kyiv resists. For the ones who said that was a matter of hours, the fall of Kyiv, this is not the case. Kyiv is resisting, Mariupol is resisting, Kharkov are resisting. There are a lot of civilian casualties, and the flow of exiled people, don't call them migrants, please, the flow of people looking for shelter, escaping the war, is increasing, especially in the Polish border. We got the figures of all member states who have a border with Ukraine about the flow of refugees. I insist, don't call them migrants, please. In this situation, our support for the Ukrainian armed forces is crucial. Crucial. They need ammunition, they need healthcare material, they need defensive purpose arms of any kind, and we are going to provide them together with the member states, adding up to the efforts of some member states the resources that we decided to mobilize yesterday from the European funding. And everyone, I said everyone, agreed on that. So member states are determined to increase their military support on a bilateral basis to Ukraine and to top up this effort with the funding of the European Union, in order to repel the unacceptable action by Putin, who is implementing this aggression to Ukraine with the support of Lukashenko, who, by the way, is organizing today a constitutional referendum in a context of oppression and widespread human rights violations. He is organizing a referendum to delete the Belarus non-nuclear status from the Constitution and to make Belarus a basis for the nuclear weapons of Russia. Everybody will understand the importance of this decision and the dangerous escalation of the conflict when Russia is putting in high alarm, high alert duty its nuclear missiles and its fleet in the Pacific and in the Baltic. Well, in order to be coherent, we will further strengthen our sanctions package against the Belarus regime and all those who cooperate with the Russian military aggressions against Ukraine. As I said yesterday, we adopted an unprecedented support package under the European Peace Facility to help Ukrainian armed forces to defend Ukraine's territorial integrity. And this was done in a record time. I started working on this proposal after the European Union Council immediately after the European Union Council, I started thinking that enough was not enough, that we could do more. And after the Foreign Affairs Ministers, when we decided finally to put Putin on the list and Lavrov on the list of sanctioned people, but we were not able to decide on the financial measures related to take Russia out of SWIFT, we start thinking that we should be doing more. And immediately we start preparing this decision, which in one hand mobilize resources to help military to Ukraine, which is, as I said yesterday, a turning point on the history of European integration. Because until now, it was considered that the European Union, which is a peace union, not a military union, was not allowed to supply arms to a third country. That's what we are doing now. This is another taboo that falls. And secondly, and tomorrow at the Parliament we will discuss about it, that the ministers has been informed about the decision that will put a strong toll on the Russian economy, because to cut half of the reserves of the Russian central bank is going to be very damaging. But today the defense ministers work a lot on the coordination of the efforts in order to make effective all bilateral initiative together with our funding. And we have created a clearinghouse to keep track of the Ukrainian request in one side and their needs, and our F offers, member states offers, in order to ensure maximum effectiveness and coordination of our support. And in doing so, this cell, this clearinghouse cell, will be working in coordination with NATO. Ukraine has been asking also support for geospatial intelligence, and we are mobilizing our satellite center, which is placed in Madrid, to work on that. So I think that from the mobilization of resources, everything is on track. It has to be done quickly because the war continues. The war cannot wait for bureaucratic procedures. And I think that our answer and our overcoming of the institutional difficulties has been quick and showing a new era in our relations with Russia. And one of the things that the European Union has to do is to decrease as quick as possible its dependency on oil and Russian oil and gas. We pay a very high bill to Putin, and this money is being used to finance its military aggression. I want also to differentiate between Putin and Putin regime and the Russian people. We are sure that the Russian people don't want this war. It is a war that started by Putin and by Putin regime with a clique of oligarchs who are supporting him. And we are strongly convinced that one of the best ways of fighting is to fight against the black money issue from corruption that supports the people who support Putin. And on the measures taken yesterday and approved by legislative procedures by the Commission at the proposal of the Commission and the High Representative, an important package of these measures are addressed to fight the money that these people, these oligarchs, have in our banks and our financial systems. And I am very happy to know that Switzerland has joined us on the implementation of this package, because without the participation of Switzerland, our measures would have been not as much effective as needed. But that's a very good news, that Switzerland joins the efforts of the European Union to fight financially and to fight against corruption and to fight against the dark money, the black money of the oligarchs who are supporting Putin, that are being targeted by our sanctions, and they will continue being targeted by our sanctions. We'll talk later more about how to fight against corruption, because corruption is part also of the challenges we have to face. We are also worried about the situation in other countries of the neighborhood, mainly Moldova and Georgia. And I am heading for Chisinau on Wednesday to meet with the Moldovan authorities and meet with Ukrainian people who have been forced by Putin aggression to leave their homes and look for help, for shelter, their need of assistance in Moldova. But Moldova is mainly one of the countries in which we believe that the Russian pressure can be increasing on the coming days. Also in the Western Balkans. As I announced on Friday, I decided to mobilize the reserve of the Althea operation. And up to now, 500 men and women will reinforce this force on the ground. And I thank the countries who will be providing this reinforcement of our capacity to control the situation through the Operation Althea. I think it's a prudent and proportionate sign of our determination to maintain the stability at Bosnia-Herzegovina and face possible destabilization activities by Russia in the Balkans. All that shows that we have been able to react quickly and in unity. All that shows the importance of advancing towards the adoption of this strategic compass that, when I presented, was a way to stress that Europe needs to awake from the security and defense dimension, that our effort on security and defense has to be more evident. From this point of view, I welcome the decision by Germany to take important steps on increasing their defense capacities, but the increase on defense capabilities of the member states of the European Union has to be done in a coordinated manner, because altogether our defense expenditure is four times the defense expenditure of Russia and equal to the one of China. But certainly we cannot say that it's equally efficient. So we have to spend more, but overall we need to spend better. And Europe is the framework in which this increase on the efficiency of our military expenditure has to take place. We have no other choice but to stand together as European Union in support of Ukraine, keeping in mind that it's not just supporting the Ukrainian people, it's also supporting our security and also the stability of the world. This is going to have a price. This is not a free lunch. Sanctions will backlash. Sanctions have a cost. And it's better to express and to explain to our public opinion that this is the truth. But we have to be ready to pay this price now, because if not, we will have to pay a much bigger price in the future. I think it's important to face that with determination and realism. We are turning a page on the history of the European integration and also on the history of Europe in the post-World War and in the post-Cold War. The relations with Russia will no more be determined by trade, believing that trade will make a political transformation of the regime. We want to support the Russian people. I am just recording a message, another message to the Russian people. We don't want to fight with them. We want just to defend Ukraine first and a way of living after, in front of the Russian aggression. Well, I am wrong saying the Russian aggression. It's better to say from the Putin aggression and the Putin regime aggression, which is antithetic with ours. Values, and that's why we are standing behind the people of Ukraine.
Thank you, High Representative. And now I will take questions, and I have quite a lot in the room and remotely. I will start by Yuri.
not many questions because it's 4 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Nabila. High Representative, I have questions, of course, on the support to armed forces of Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit more what was discussed today of what will be delivered to Ukraine? And, for example, will there be missile defenses? Because we see that Russia is using missiles to attack also Ukrainian cities and civilians. And the second question, can you tell us also, was it discussed how to deliver this aid to Ukraine? We know that there is a land border, of course, with EU member states, but as Russia has these missiles, like Iskander missiles in Belarus and is using it. So how to protect this delivery of this little aid to Ukraine so that Ukraine can use it? Thank you very much.
Mire, I'm going to speak Spanish because it's more natural for me to answer this question in
our
Spanish.
Interpreters
You know?
here. I wouldn't understand it. You need to...
You know what does it mean? Mire, estamos en una guerra y no voy a dar ninguna información que pueda servir a la parte a la que nos enfrentamos. Comprenderá que no le voy a contar a usted con pelos y señales por dónde y cómo va a pasar la ayuda que vamos a proporcionar a Ucrania. Estoy seguro que Rusia estaría muy contenta de saberlo. Hoy las autoridades rusas han dicho que considerarán que la ayuda que la Unión Europea va a dar a Ucrania constituye un acto inamistoso y que atacarán a cualquier persona o cualquier entidad que transporte esta ayuda hacia Ucrania. Por lo tanto, va a permitir que no le dé ningún detalle que pueda serles de utilidad. Sí le puedo decir que naturalmente pasará por aquellos países que tienen una frontera con Ucrania. Pero eso supongo que no es desvelar ningún secreto. Y en cuanto a la clase de material, ya le dije ayer, y repito, que se trata de material defensivo, armas y municiones de todos los calibres que les permitan defenderse de la agresión.
Okay, merci. Now I go to the colleagues remotely, and Thomas has raised the first hand.
Oui, merci. C'est Thomas Miglierina de la télévision suisse. Je peux vous demander de commenter en français la décision du Conseil fédéral de s'aligner sur les sanctions de l'Union européenne. Et deuxième question, plus ou moins au même temps, le ministre russe Lavrov a décidé d'annuler la visite de demain à Genève. Il a cité, je regarde les tweets de la mission russe à Genève, le ban, donc les sanctions, la fermeture de l'espace aérien de l'Union européenne. Mais est-ce que les restrictions s'appliquent aussi aux vols diplomatiques? Merci.
My French is not excellent, but I will try to say in French.
Vous avez un français impeccable, monsieur le représentant.
Non, écoutez, d'après ce que je sais, le gouvernement suisse a décidé de s'aligner complètement avec les sanctions européennes. Il va faire exactement la même chose que nous. C'est très bien. C'est parfait. C'est une mauvaise nouvelle pour la Russie. Mais du point de vue de l'unité du monde, disons, occidental et du point de vue de l'applicabilité, de l'efficacité de ces sanctions financières, par exemple, tous les actifs que soient déposés dans la Banque centrale suisse, je ne sais pas s'il y en a ou pas, ou combien, ils seront gelés. Et ça ne servira de rien aux oligarques de transférer ces actifs en Suisse. Parce que Suisse va faire exactement la même chose que nous. C'est une très très bonne nouvelle. Et la deuxième question,
c'était sur
Ah, non, non. La sanction permet parfaitement M. Lavrov de voyager à Genève. Il y a des exceptions diplomatiques. On n'a pas pris la mesure d'interdire à M. Lavrov de voyager à Genève pour des raisons diplomatiques. Si c'est pour des vacances, non.
Is this Naomi? Yes, please, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks very much. And Naomi O'Leary, Irish Times. I have two quick questions, if I could, High Representative. The first one is about cyber attacks. Can you confirm any cyber attacks of Russian origin? For example, we've had a major attack on Toyota, as one example. The second question is about hidden assets. In every harbour of the Mediterranean, there are mega yachts proudly flying the flags of tax havens where their ownership is concealed by shell companies, and many of their owners are Russian oligarchs whose names are very well known. How will we identify the ownership of those? Will they be affected? Will they be seized? And what about cryptocurrencies? Are there any steps taken, given the design of crypto, to be peer-to-peer and to evade regulation? Thank you.
No tengo conciencia o información de ese ataque concreto al que usted se refiere contra una empresa en particular, pero ha habido ataques cibernéticos contra varios ministerios en Ucrania, contra varios medios de comunicación en Ucrania. Naturalmente que Rusia lanza ataques cibernéticos, no tengo constancia de esta última, pero Ucrania nos ha pedido ayuda para defenderse de los ataques cibernéticos, que sufre y sufrirá, me temo, y naturalmente eso formará parte de nuestra ayuda. Los activos ocultos de las personas que son objetos de las sanciones que hemos aprobado estos días tendrán que ser localizados, y una vez localizados tendrá que actuarse contra ellos. Yo no me voy a pasear por todos los puertos de Europa buscando los yates de los oligarcas, pero tenemos células que lo van a hacer.
Jean-Pierre, tu avais demandé la parole.
Bonjour, Monsieur le représentant. Une précision par rapport à des propos que vous avez tenus hier sur le fait qu'on allait octroyer à l'Ukraine des avions ou des avions de chasse. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner quelques détails? Quels pays vont donner ces avions et par qui seront pilotés ces avions? Est-ce que les pays qui les donneront à l'Ukraine s'engageront dès lors dans le conflit? Et donc il y aurait une présence européenne dans le conflit. On suppose que ce n'est pas ça. Donc on est un petit peu troublé par vos déclarations. Ça serait peut-être bien de les préciser. Merci.
No se preocupe. Con los 500 millones de euros que hemos movilizado, aunque quisiéramos, no podríamos movilizar muchos cazas. Que no se sabe usted cuál es el precio de un caza, ¿no? De manera que no estamos hablando de lo que decidimos con nuestros fondos, pero que ciertamente pueden, algunos países europeos, pueden, si quieren, bilateralmente movilizar toda clase de ayuda, porque ciertamente Ucrania para defenderse necesita también medios aéreos y eso forma parte de las peticiones de ayuda que nos ha dirigido, pero tendrán que ser aquellos países europeos que dispongan, si disponen, de cazas que puedan ser pilotados por los pilotos de la Fuerza Aérea Ucraniana, los que tengan que instrumentar esa ayuda.
Merci beaucoup. Can I take another question?
If it is easy, si es fácil, sí.
Thomas, your question is easy or no? And fast.
Tomasz Bielecki, Deutsche Welle, Gazeta Wyborcza. Yes, it would be easy. I was going to ask about fighter jets, but answered. So, Hajrab, you've mentioned also yesterday about the Poland serving as a hub for this military help, EU help for the Ukraine. And today ministers decided, as you said, on creating the clearing house. Is it the same? how did it work, how many people, and where geographically it would work? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
No, una cámara de compensación es un instrumento financiero. No hace falta moverse de Bruselas para instrumentarla. Una clearing house es hacer un matching entre ofertas y demandas. Eso se puede hacer perfectamente con un teléfono y una hoja de papel, es decir, quién pide y quién da. Y no dar dos veces lo mismo, no dar cosas que no se necesitan y dejar peticiones sin atender. ¿Entiende? O sea, Ucrania está planteando peticiones, hay 27 países que las están atendiendo, se trata de hacer de manera que nos coordinemos a la hora de atender las peticiones de Ucrania y no dejar ninguna sin satisfacer, evitar duplicaciones y carencias. Pero eso se hace aquí, con un ordenador desde Bruselas. Otra cosa, naturalmente, es transportar todo el material, porque claro, está muy bien decir, aquí hay dinero, sí, pero con dinero no se combate con armas, y las armas tienen que estar allí donde se combate, y por lo tanto hay que transportarlas. Y eso requiere una logística física, no de paper, una logística física muy poderosa y muy importante que tendrán que organizar los Estados miembros a través, ciertamente, de aquellos estados que son fronterizos con Ucrania. Pero permítame que después de lo que he oído que decían algunos responsables militares rusos, no les dé más detalles. Y ahora sí que...
Okay, so...
A ver, la última pregunta. Seamos amables con la prensa que hace su trabajo.
Muchas gracias. Lorenzo Consoli, News. Hi, Representative. I will appreciate your answer in Spanish because your Spanish is beautiful. But I ask it in English because my Spanish is not as beautiful. We are now in an escalation, a clear escalation with this military answer from the EU. The first time it happens, military support for the Ukrainian. My question is, how can we keep energy out of this? It's clear that for the Russians now, energy could become a way, cutting energy, a way to damage the EU, because we have 40% of our energy coming from Russia. So how can energy remain outside all this? Thanks.
The energy will not be out of this conflict, like it or not. We have a dependency on Russian oil and gas. We are going to decrease this dependency as quick as possible, and this is an existential policy to decrease the dependency, which has been increasing, by the way, in the last years. 4 years we have been talking about decreasing, and we have been increasing. Well, that's time to decrease, seriously. It means renewables and hydrogen. Very much. But there's going to be turbulences on the markets of energy. It's easy to understand. It will happen. It's happening. And it will increase prices. And prices will be paid by consumers. Maybe we can introduce subsidies, policies to protect the most vulnerables. But we are in a situation in which, and that's what I was saying at the beginning, our actions and reactions against Russia will have economic consequences. And we have to be prepared for that. Don't believe that we can do whatever we need to do without having consequences. Look the consequences that the Ukrainian people are paying. They are paying a lot of consequences. They are resisting, and thank God Zelensky is not the kind of the leader that escapes hidden in the car. No, he will stay there resisting. And we have to support him. And it's going to have a cost. And if we don't pay this cost today, we'll pay much more tomorrow. That's clear? Thank you.
On this note, I would like to thank you very much, and thanks to the interpreter, and I'm sorry for all those who I couldn't take questions from.
We are introducing the new Ukrainian humanitarian route, which just responds directly to the needs and asks of the Ukrainian government. And this means it gives British nationals and any person settled in the UK the ability to bring over their immediate Ukrainian family members. Through this extension alone, it will mean an additional 100,000 Ukrainians will be able to seek sanctuary in the United Kingdom. And I'm sure the Home Secretary will be outlining more details about the scheme in due course.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that I stand with Ukraine and support the Foreign Secretary in the measures that she's announced this afternoon, and to congratulate her on the unified way that she's doing that. But would you agree with me that the language we use is incredibly important in these very, very delicate times? And also, could you say anything about the Commonwealth and their involvement?
Well, the Honourable Lady is right. The language is very important. This war is not on behalf of the Russian people. This war has been instigated by President Putin, and I think it's very important that we focus on the personal agency he has had in mounting this unprovoked attack on Ukraine. I do understand there's a huge strength of feeling across the United Kingdom, and we are reflecting that in everything we do.
Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for the announcement that she and the Prime Minister has made about humanitarian relief, and can I urge her to join with other European countries in helping shoulder the financial burden of the humanitarian load of the frontline states. Most people who flee across the border want to stay as close as possible to the areas from which they have been driven. And all European countries must give the strongest support to those driven out in great fear and terror by this extraordinary and barbaric Russian behaviour.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the previous lady asked on the subject of our friends across the Commonwealth, and I can assure her that we are approaching friends across the Commonwealth to secure their support for the sanctions, for the strong stance against Russia, and supporting the Ukrainian people. On the subject of humanitarian relief in neighbouring countries, we've sent teams to Poland and Slovakia. We are supporting them. We've launched our campaign, and we are going to launch a further public appeal to secure further humanitarian donations. And in fact, I'm due to meet my Polish counterpart tomorrow in Geneva, and we'll be working very, very closely with our allies in Eastern Europe to support the people of Ukraine.
Liz Roberts.
I welcome, of course, BP's decision to divest from Rosneft after I raised that very issue with the Prime Minister last week. International sanctions now include Russia's civilian aircraft fleet. The UK has a part to play in their enforcement, since as of yesterday, 713 leased Russian aircraft are registered in Bermuda, a British overseas territory. For far too long, weak UK regulation of London grab and tax haven overseas territories has enabled Putin's regime. What discussions has she had with British overseas territories to ensure the immediate, effective implementation of UK sanctions against Russia?
Well, like the Honourable Lady, I welcome BP's divestment that has taken place, and we're working closely with the overseas territories to make sure that Putin's oligarchs have nowhere to hide.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the sanctions regime needs to stay in place until every inch of Ukrainian territory is back in Ukraine control, including Crimea?
Yes, I completely agree with my honourable friend.
Marcia de Cordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents are being affected by the war in Ukraine, and like me, they recognise the need for the toughest possible sanctions on Russia. Now, the Foreign Secretary's statement is welcome, but it didn't really go far enough. So can she tell the House now what steps she is actually taking to ensure that there will be sanctions imposed on extraction industries and also technology industries?
Well, what I announced today is that the export controls will apply to critical technology, so it will make it much harder to invest in those industries in Russia, oil and gas and technology, and of course the military-industrial complex. But she is right, the fundamental issue here is that Putin is reliant on oil and gas revenues, and that's where we need to work with our G7 partners. Is predominantly continental Europe that is dependent on oil and gas and coal from Russia, and we need to help them reduce that dependency so that Putin has nowhere to source his funds, and that's what we're doing through the G7.
Dr. Julian.
Mr. Speaker, as a matter of superior tactics, does my right honourable friend accept that the right way to deal with a robotic, sneering psychopath firmly in the grip of small man syndrome is not to impose sanctions in a piecemeal and gradually escalating way, but to seek to inflict maximum economic pain at the earliest possible moment?
Yes is the answer, and that is what we are doing. We are pushing as hard as we can for the toughest possible sanctions. This is the biggest package of sanctions the UK has ever put in place in our history, and we want to do even more, and we want to push it with our allies. Together with the G7, we represent half of the global economy, and that is what will really shift Putin's behaviour. That is what will really degrade the Russian economy and stop him being able to fund his war machine.
Justin Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, listening to the Right Honourable Lady's comments, I'm not entirely sure yet what the hold-up potentially is with clarifying the plans to sanction Russia's political ruling class, members of the Duma, the Senate, the Presidential Council, the top echelons of security and defence services, and public television employees. And I wonder if she's able to set out for us a little bit more about how soon we might see that happen, given the need for action to be swift, decisive and clear.
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we have a hit list of oligarchs, of Duma members, of those key personnel we're talking about, and we will be announcing those as we build the evidence and case against them. But we need those cases to be legally watertight. That's what's important, so that when we hit them, the hit sticks.
Sir John Redmond.
Will the government now allow and encourage more domestic production of oil and gas to help reduce the cruel dependence of Europe on Russian energy?
Well, we certainly are committed to using the UK's oil and gas fields. Energy independence is vitally important. We also need to invest more in nuclear, which my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is working on.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, can I offer the Secretary of State a little bit of advice, because I have been in the House quite a bit of time. No one, can I congratulate, no one now likes oligarchs. But can I suggest that there's some very important, very substantial figures that we call oligarchs in London, in this country, and they actually are very intelligent and influential people on Putin. Would she agree with me that she should consult with them as a way of getting a voice of experience and reason to Putin in order that we could get a better resolution and a peaceful resolution of this horrible crisis?
Let's be absolutely clear here. This is unprovoked aggression by Putin after months of warning that there would be severe consequences and a long-running conflict. I do not believe that this is somebody who is capable of reason on that level at this stage. And what we have to be is we have to be tougher than tough. We have to be tough with our sanctions. We have to be tough with the military aid that we're supplying and our allies are supplying, because it is only strength that Vladimir Putin understands.
Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK and our allies have delivered meaningful economic strikes against Putin, but we now see the encirclement of civilian towns, the illegal and indiscriminate use of cluster weapons, Chechen militia for calling for more indiscriminate attacks. So can she please reassure me we will maintain maximum pressure, map and record all atrocities for future prosecution, but will she also commit to draw up plans for if we see the use of incendiary munitions or chemical weapons?
Well, my honourable friend is regrettably right that that is the type of action that we are seeing being contemplated. And everybody involved, including Putin's advisers, his generals, should be aware that the ICC is already looking at this. They're already looking at potential war crimes being committed, and we are urging a full investigation to take place.
Van Jones.
The Foreign Secretary for her statement. She talks about a hit list of oligarchs. Now, she knows as well as I do that there are individuals on that list, some that are well known, some that aren't so well known. The one thing they have in common is that they've all supported and continue to support Putin's regime. So can she tell me in terms of the timescale in dealing with some of these individuals? She says she wants more evidence. Well, surely we have the evidence against certain of those individuals. What timescale is she talking about when we will actually see lists of these individuals being printed and sanctions being taken?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've already announced over 120 businesses and oligarchs that have already been sanctioned. What I can tell him is there is a list that we are working through, and we will be announcing more as soon as the evidence is ready.
Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the resolute approach being taken by my right honourable friend and ask her whether she will consider secondary sanctions, that is to say, sanctions not against Russian entities, but against entities in other countries that seek to profit from the gap left in trade. It is totally unacceptable for others to profiteer from this invasion, but also it will increase the pressure on Russia, as we know it did successfully on Iran.
Yes, we are looking at that, and my honourable friend is 100% right.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I sat on the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Bill and watched in horror as the Honourable Lady's Party walked away from the opportunity to sanction Russia and the flow of dirty money through the UK. I'm sure with the benefit of hindsight, she and her party realise what a grave mistake that was. So will she now take the action? And the action she announces is welcome, but the action against Scottish limited partnerships, which are having a profound impact on many nations, and the secrecy havens that are the British overseas territories, notably the British Virgin Islands and the Isle of Man. Given her government's failure, surely these actions need to come now.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady's welcome for the legislation, the economic crime bill that we will be introducing tomorrow, and my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be saying more about this in his statement.
William Cash.
Would the Foreign Secretary confirm that the secondary legislation that's being introduced is now in the vote office or will be very soon? And secondly, would she also please confirm that the consequences of this legislation will be set out in clear and simple language from a practical point of view, so that the people who are affected by it, British businesses and the British individuals who are affected, can understand precisely what's happening in a clear and easily understood way?
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that it will be in the vote office as soon as possible. It's important that we get it absolutely right. And he talked about businesses being affected. There will be advice through the Export Support Service run by the Department of International Trade, making sure business have all the information they need.
Will my right honourable friend confirm that the Russian people are being consistently lied to by Russian state media, both in terms of the scale of Russia's military action and the loss of life that is taking place as a result? Does she agree that that makes the role of the BBC World Service and other trusted media all the more important? And will she bear that in mind when considering any calls for taking action against Russian state media in this country?
Well, my right honourable friend is entirely right. There is simply a pack of lies produced on Russian state media. And he's also right about the vital importance of the BBC World Service and other services that the Russian people can hear a more balanced version and a truthful version of events from. And he's right about the consequences and the unintended consequences of preventing channels from operating in the UK, as there could be reciprocation, which would then make it harder for the Russian people to hear the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been overwhelmed with messages from constituents horrified about Russia's action in Ukraine. And this morning I visited Lewisham Polish Centre, who are doing brilliant work coordinating the local relief effort for those fleeing the country. But what everyone I've heard from has asked for is assurances that we're putting forward the strongest possible package of sanctions, providing humanitarian relief for refugees fleeing to neighbouring countries and offering comprehensive safe sanctuary routes to the UK. Can I press the Foreign Secretary to give us those reassurances today?
Foreign Secretary.
I can reassure the Honourable Lady that we are doing all of those things. The sanctions that we currently have in place on Russia are the toughest sanctions the UK has put on any country or as a size of package in our entire history. But we are doing more. The important point is that we are working with our allies to do more every day.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
My Argyll constituents can't understand why we still allow Russian state-owned oil tankers to use UK ports. The Russian state-owned oil tanker NS Century is currently at the Finnart oil terminal in Loch Long, a port adjacent to Coolport, which is a home to the UK's nuclear arsenal. Why, when we're imposing such harsh economic sanctions on the Kremlin, are we continuing to allow Russian state-owned oil tankers to go freely about their business, particularly so close to this most sensitive military installation?
They won't be going about their business freely for much longer.
Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. If the BBC World Service comes to her to ask for additional funding to increase the broadcasting in Russia and amongst Russia's supporting allies, will she entertain such requests and agree to them?
Well, I will certainly entertain the requests. I will make sure that they are value for money as well.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't understand why Abramovich and Usmanov has still not been included on the sanction list. I don't really understand why the Prime Minister said last Thursday that we weren't going to engage in cultural or sporting boycotts, because we certainly should. We should throw every single thing we've got at the Russians. And finally, I don't understand why the Prime Minister also said last Thursday that we're not going to be sending any Russian diplomats back home. Surely we should at least be cutting the Russian embassy here by a half or three-quarters, if not deciding that, frankly, the ambassador, who has lied through his teeth to this House, should go back home.
Well, as I said earlier, we have a hit list of oligarchs that we are working through. We are, and my right honourable friend, the Culture Secretary, is taking a very tough line on cultural activities, and we've seen a number of sporting events already cancelled.
Mr. Rayleigh.
Speaker, this is an incredibly tough time for the people of Ukraine, but it's also an incredibly nervous time for the people of the three Baltic states, who must undoubtedly feel that they themselves are at risk. These are good friends of the United Kingdom. They're people who have good relations with members across this House. Will she join me in sending a message to them that we are on their side, and will she do everything she can to make sure that we stand firmly alongside the Baltics in these nervous times?
My right honourable friend is correct. We know that Putin doesn't just want to take over Ukraine and restore Russian hegemony over Ukraine. We know that he wants to turn the clock back to the mid-1990s, where vast swathes of Eastern Europe were under Russian control. This is one of the many reasons why it's so important that his ambitions stop in Ukraine. This is why we're supporting the Ukrainians. It's also why we are increasing our strength on the Eastern flank. We've doubled the amount of troops into Estonia. Our allies are also stepping up to support the Baltic states, who are vital allies of the United Kingdom.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the sanctions set out by the Foreign Secretary and the words that she says about getting Putin's dirty money out of UK finance. But can we also get it out of UK politics? And would she support the Conservative Party handing back the £2 million from Russian oligarchs?
Mr. Speaker, there is a big difference between Russian people and supporters of the Putin regime. And it's important that we don't tar every single Russian, many of whom have gained British citizenship and who are part of our political process, with the same brush.
Mr.
Speaker, thank you very much. Hundreds of people rallied at Bolton Town Hall on Saturday. Outside of London, we have one of the most established Ukrainian diaspora communities in the UK. Will the FCDO agree to meet with the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain to discuss the UK's resolve for their friends and family? We are with them, and freedom will prevail.
We would be absolutely delighted to do that.
Tony Lloyd, Sir Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House should commend the Foreign Secretary's statement, but will she agree with me that with any sanctions regime, it is the detail that makes sure we can police it? And will she, in that light, look into the case of the plane of Mikhail Gutseriev, who is already sanctioned under Belarus sanctions, a friend of Putin, but whose plane itself was sanctioned by her predecessor, but landed, I'm told, twice at Luton Airport? This cannot be right.
Well, I will look into the case the honourable gentleman raises.
Liz Truss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome the leadership that the UK has shown in developing international sanctions. But would my right honourable friend think about going a step further? At the moment, we are freezing assets of those sanctioned. Would she consider putting a charge onto those assets, monetising the charge now and using the money raised to pay for the support of refugees in Eastern Europe and ultimately to rebuild Ukraine?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her very innovative idea, and I will certainly have a look at that.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. Will government be looking at addressing crypto assets, cryptocurrency, which may be utilised to try to mitigate the impact of some of the sanctions imposed? The all-party group of crypto and digital assets that I chair are very keen to play a responsible role and support government moving forward in that realm.
Well, we've worked very closely with the Treasury on this package of sanctions, and certainly we are looking at every possible route that could be used to undermine the sanctions and tackling it, and cryptocurrency is one of those.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The rhetoric and the statements coming out of the Kremlin this weekend would appear to indicate that the invasion is not going to plan from the Russian perspective. Could my honourable friend please convince the House that the UK, the US and all of our allies will not blink when it comes to the global imperative to eject Russian forces from Ukraine, and also in the need to ensure that Ukraine is restored as quickly as possible to a free, democratic and proud nation.
I am very clear that there is a tough road ahead. And what I can say is that we are with the Ukrainian people. We know that this could last for some time. At yesterday's G7 foreign ministers, we were clear that the tough package of sanctions would increase. We're going to be doing more over the coming days and weeks, and we will continue to put pressure on the Kremlin. We will continue to supply the defensive weaponry into Ukraine to support them in their just cause of pursuing self-determination and sovereignty.
Florence Session-Lerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like members across this House, I've been contacted by Vauxhall residents who want to express their solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I attended Racial Justice Sunday Mass at the Church of the Holy Spirit, where a number of constituents raised with me the reports which the Secretary of State may have seen of African migrants in Ukraine trying to flee and being discriminated. The Secretary of State mentioned that she'll be meeting with her Polish counterpart in the next coming few days. Would she please raise the issue of those migrants in her discussions?
I'm happy to raise that issue.
Craig Whittaker.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, who I know has worked tirelessly along with the Prime Minister over the last few weeks to do all they can to help stop the regime of Putin, particularly around sanctions. But would my honourable friend agree, though, that it's vital that we continue to work to plug the holes in our sanctions regime, which allows Putin to ship oil from this country? And I wonder if she could say whether there's anything legally we can do to stop that ship that's currently up in the Orkneys waiting to ship oil.
I am looking very closely at this with my colleague, the Transport Secretary, to get this addressed as soon as possible.
Carmichael.
Thank you. I have to tell the Foreign Secretary that time is not on her side. The NS Challenger is due to berth at 6 a.m. on Wednesday. Now, in the last hour, the Secretary of State for Transport has written to all UK ports requesting them not to grant access to Russian vessels. That's a very welcome move, but the House will have noticed that he used the word in request rather than instruct. Yep. So can the Foreign Secretary tell me now, or get me early information, that if the terminal operators at Flotta in Orkney refuse to berth the NS Challenger, that they will not be left financially exposed as a result?
I'm looking at this issue urgently with the Transport Secretary, and I will get back to the honourable gentleman with that information.
Jen Stevenson.
Speaker, when parliamentarians in this place see our counterparts in Ukraine taking up arms to defend their country, it is really sobering. Does she agree that it is vital we send that united and clear message that we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, even if that is for the long haul, and this is a war that Putin cannot win?
We have seen the acts of incredible bravery from the Ukrainian population, from Ukrainian politicians, including President Zelensky, who has led from the front, and it is absolutely inspiring. And our message across the House today should be that however long it takes, however difficult it is, whatever the difficulties we have economically, they cannot compare to the sheer hell the people of Ukraine are going through. And we will be with them through thick and thin until Putin loses and until the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine is restored.
Liam Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole House will have welcomed the Foreign Secretary's ambition this afternoon, but can we speed up the process of hitting the people on the hit list? There are 23 people on the EU sanctions list who are not on the UK sanction list as of this morning. The ban on trading in state bonds is in place in Europe, but not in the UK. The ban on import and export from breakaway regions is in place in Europe, but not in the UK. The asset freeze and travel ban on Duma members is in place in Europe, but not in the UK. The asset freeze and travel bans in place in Europe, number 22, and just 8 in the UK, announced in the last few days. What further power and resources does the Foreign Secretary need in order for us to catch up with our American and European allies?
Well, we are leading from the front. There are many. So, for example, we are banning clearing from Sberbank, which the EU aren't doing at the moment. We are freezing more bank assets. We have advocated the SWIFT ban, and we want to get all of our allies to agree to a SWIFT ban. But this is not a competition between us and our allies. This is a concerted endeavour where all of us are doing all we can, as quickly as can, to show unity and deliver a massive hit to the Russian economy. And you've seen the drop in the ruble today, Mr. Speaker. You've seen the impact this unity is having. And I strongly encourage colleagues across the House to support our package, which is unprecedented in United Kingdom history, to, of course, put pressure on more countries to join us. But there are areas where we are going a lot further than our allies. There are some areas where they have gone further than us. But what we need to do is continue to make progress together. That is what sends a strong message to Putin.
I'd like to pay tribute to the bravery of the Ukrainian people. But change often begins at home. And in this particular case, Alexei Navalny is currently incarcerated, the leader of the opposition, in prison in Russia. Would the Foreign Secretary agree with me that there should be stronger calls for him to be released so that democracy can truly flourish in Russia once again?
Well, my honourable friend is correct about Navalny, and he ought to be released. And we've seen a terrible suppression of democracy. We've also seen a terrible suppression of information in Russia. But despite that, we're seeing people in Russia come out on the streets. We're seeing public figures speak out against the regime, and that takes incredible bravery. And I congratulate and am humbled by the people in Russia who are prepared to risk their lives to stand up for freedom.
Kerry McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, following on from that, we know how ruthless Putin can be when it comes to internal opposition. Yesterday was the 7th anniversary of the murder of Boris Nemtsov. Navalny's in prison. I myself went out for the trial of Pussy Riot some years ago. What are we doing to offer support to people that will come under increased repression in Russia? We may not be able to directly support them, but what are we doing to try to bolster their courage and make sure that they keep up the opposition to Putin?
Well, we have always worked to support those who speak out in favour of free speech, free media and democracy in Russia, and we continue to do that. And we congratulate those who are prepared to go out and protest against this regime's appalling actions. And our concerns are not with the Russian people. Our concerns are with Vladimir Putin and his regime.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, I warmly welcome the leadership shown and the progress made by the Foreign Secretary and the government with partners on intensifying economic sanctions. The announcements from Switzerland and Singapore were particularly important. What more does my right honourable friend think that we can do to persuade the countries of the United Arab Emirates to stand up more strongly for the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity against unwarranted aggression?
Well, I've had a phone call with my UAE counterpart making exactly those points. And every country around the world should be aware that if this is allowed to happen, if a country, because it's bigger and mightier, is allowed to invade a sovereign democracy with impunity, then this could happen anywhere. So this is about Ukraine and its sovereignty and democracy. This is about the security of Europe. But this is also about global security and global rules. And that is why every single country, including non-democracies, should care about making sure that Putin loses in Ukraine.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased the Foreign Secretary has urged Russia to enable safe passage for civilians to flee the violence. But does she recognise that her own government has to do far more to offer sanctuary to those fleeing? Limiting it to immediate family members simply isn't good enough. The elderly grandmother of my constituent has been granted a UK visa, but has been told that she has to travel 300 miles from Kyiv to Lviv to get the visa actually stamped in her passport. Now, I raised it with the Foreign Secretary last week. She told me to contact the Home Office. I have contacted the Home Office to no avail. Since this relates to the operation of the embassy, can she help? And can she assure us that this won't be a repeat of the Afghanistan crisis, where honourable members were bounced between the Home Office and the Foreign Office with very little success? Meanwhile, our constituents suffered.
Well, our ambassador, who is in Lviv, is doing a fantastic job in very difficult circumstances. And we are doing all we can to support people in Ukraine. As I've said, this case is a matter for the Home Office. I'm very happy to take the case and make sure the Home Secretary is aware of it.
Jonathan Chudovsky.
I realised that the government really understood the nature of sanctioning oligarchs when the sanctions on Aeroflot were extended to private jets. In that vein, will my right honourable friend now consider banning insurance for Russian yachts and jets, which will be worldwide application and make life a lot tougher for those concerned?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his idea, and nothing is off the table.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome what the Foreign Secretary said about banning airlines, Russian airlines, and banning Russian ships from docking at our ports. But just yesterday afternoon, we had a Russian-owned and Russian-crewed ship heading from Inverness down to Humber to dock. And I know the Foreign Secretary has made clear she's in discussions with the Transport Secretary, but I wonder if she can give some indication when we will have sanctions to stop that happening, because there was a huge amount of local opposition in the Humber to that ship.
Well, the local opposition is right, and we are working as fast as we can to deal with this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend and her team for all the amazing work they're doing in the face of this appalling invasion. With this worrying resurgence of both Russia and China, does my right honourable friend agree with me the best way to combat this and to reassure other countries is not only to invest in our own defence, but in our diplomatic reach around the world, so we can spread our values of democracy and freedom and proclaim them even more loudly?
Foreign Secretary.
Yes, well, that sounds like a petition to the Chancellor, which I wholly agree with, about the Foreign Office's budget. And I very much support that. And he is right. You know, this horrific invasion is a massive wake-up call to the West about our defence and the need to invest in NATO. And one thing I'm very pleased to see is Germany committing to 2% of its GDP into NATO. We need to see everybody commit to that, and we need to look on what more we can do to strengthen NATO, because we have taken European security for granted and we can't do that any longer.
Sammy Wilson.
I first of all congratulate the Foreign Secretary on the role which she has played in the collective effort which the government has made in seeking to show President Putin that his actions will not be tolerated, and the fact that some countries which a week ago were not contemplating strict sanctions are now doing so, I think is an important step. Just on the sanctions, I understand that the Foreign Secretary has to go through the legislative process, she's got to do the investigations of the people who are going to be targeted, etc. But many of them are named in the statement today. Many of them will guess who they are. And is she not concerned that where there are assets which are mobile or assets which can be quickly hidden, that the action will be taken to avoid those sanctions?
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the ones named in the statements are either in our legislation or have already been sanctioned. And the point about working with our allies across the world is these people and organisations will have nowhere to hide.
Yes. Ciara Mullen, Dr. Ciara Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. India is a great friend of the UK and a leading democracy, and Indian communities prosper in democracies around the world, including, of course, in this country. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's in India's long-term interest to do everything they possibly can to ensure this invasion fails?
Foreign Secretary.
That is absolutely correct. Every sovereign nation who believes in fair play and the rule of law around the world should be doing all they can to stop Putin being successful in Ukraine. And that includes India, it includes China, it includes every other country around the world.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Somebody had a grandparent born and raised in Ukraine. This war does come emotionally quite close to me and everybody of Ukrainian descent in this country. During the 1990s onwards, British headquartered legal, finance, audit, risk companies have helped create the kleptocracy that exists in Russia. Many of them still have huge offices in Moscow, like KPMG, PwC, Linklaters and Ernst & Young actually put Rosneft on the London Stock Exchange. What action is she taking for British companies to withdraw from Russia, to withdraw their support from the kleptocracy that exists funding the war machine, and to delist some Russian companies on the stock exchange?
Secretary.
Well, we are running through a list, and we've already sanctioned over 120 businesses in Russia and oligarchs. We've prevented the Russian central bank from deploying its international reserves to counteract sanctions. We're freezing bank assets in vast parts of the Russian economy. And we will continue to do more to target individual companies with freezes and sanctions. As I said, nothing is off the table. We're working and train with our allies on all of this.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Foreign Secretary and the government on the swift action they've taken, including the action against the Russian Central Bank, and commend her on her work to go further. But frankly, isn't it desperate and indeed pitiful to try to blame words from Her Majesty's government for the Russian outrageous escalation of dangerous rhetoric yesterday? Because the truth is that it is imperative for the stability of the international order that Putin fails.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, my right honourable friend is right. The reality is Putin has made these threats in order to distract from his unprovoked invasion into Ukraine. And the reason that we are being targeted is because the UK has been leading on measures to both support Ukraine and degrade the Russian economy. And they don't like it.
Sam Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Early on, we've got an unfortunately opaque response. And our response was opaque to the member for Lancaster and Fleetwood on oligarchs' financing of the Conservative Party. The honourable member for Lock Harbour has also raised this question of £2.3 million of donations. So I wonder if the Foreign Secretary would like to take this opportunity to commit today to giving that money from Russian oligarchs directly to charities that will be supporting Ukrainian refugees, hopefully not picking vegetables, but in this country in safety.
Foreign Secretary.
As I've said, we cannot tar every single person of Russian origin with the same brush. We are targeting oligarchs close to Putin without fear or favour. We are freezing bank assets without fear or favour, and we will continue to do that.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary for coming to the House to update us. I understand today the Foreign Secretary has banned travel from the United Kingdom to Russia. Have we also asked British citizens in Russia to return? And could you absolutely confirm that there is nothing off the table economically, diplomatically or militarily?
Foreign Secretary.
So we have moved our travel advice on Russia to red, which means we advise against all travel. That is not the same as a ban. It is ultimately government advice, but I strongly advise people not to go to Russia. That is very clear. On the subject of the wider issue, nothing is off the table on sanctions. We're absolutely clear about that. We're pushing our G7 allies as hard as we can to get a full ban on SWIFT, to get a full ban on all bank assets, to reduce dependence on oil and gas, which is ultimately the most important economic lever over Putin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last 8 years there has been a war. It's not been the last few days. And during that time, it's not just been in military warfare, but it's also been one of communications known as a hybrid warfare. Yesterday, the EU decided to shut down RT and Sputnik. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm that where she's leading in some areas, will she follow the EU and shut down RT and Sputnik immediately? Simply because yesterday, as I was watching it, there was a documentary completely about the Nazification in 2014 Crimea, which is wholly untrue, and it's been put on the television screens today.
Foreign Secretary.
We are looking at what can be done on RT, but the reality is that if we ban RT in the United Kingdom, that is likely to lead to channels like the BBC being banned in Russia. And what we want is we want the Russian population to hear the truth about what Vladimir Putin is doing. So there is a very careful judgment to be made, and that is something the Culture Secretary is looking at.
I'm here. She's meant to speak through me, not through the members. Sally Ann Hart, when you answer through the chair.
The vast majority of Russian people are like us. They want to earn money, provide for their families and be happy. But their president, Mr. Putin, has taken them down a very dark path and the world to the brink. Would my right honourable friend join me in urging the Russian people and those in the Kremlin who do not agree with Mr. Putin to do whatever it takes to bring back Russia from the brink and stop Putin?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I completely agree with my honourable friend that we need to do all we can to stiffen the resolve of those in Russia who are disgusted by President Putin's actions in their name. And this is why it's important that we do reach out through channels like the BBC, that we are communicating very clearly, and the Foreign Office has recently stood up our information unit, which provides communications to challenge the disinformation from the Putin regime.
Ben.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent's wife and child are currently fleeing the violence in Ukraine, and they hope to return home. But her sister, who is Ukrainian, and her 2 children, aged 10 and 4, are fleeing with them because the home they had been living in was destroyed by a Russian bomb. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that this is precisely the kind of case where the United Kingdom, with a long history of compassion and welcome to refugees, should be enabling this family together to return to the United Kingdom?
Well, it's appalling about the horrific situation that your constituents' family find themselves in. And we do need to be welcoming to refugees from this appalling, unpremeditated war created by Vladimir Putin. And I will take your inquiry onto the Home Office and get you a response.
Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, some 4 years ago, there was an inquiry announced into the
progress of golden visas, which have been potentially misallocated. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that anybody who is on her list, and I commend her on her ever-growing list of oligarchs that she is sanctioning, anybody on that list who becomes sanctioned will have any golden visas that they may have been granted in the past summarily revoked?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they won't be able to travel.
The Georgides family, the Reckham family, and many others in my constituency have family members and loved ones who are now in Poland or on the border of Poland. They want to know what conversations the Foreign Secretary has had with her counterpart in Poland about swift flights to bring those family members to the UK, and perhaps just as much of importance, what conversations she's had with the Home Secretary on that matter.
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman that we have been working closely with the Home Office on this issue, as well as the Polish government. I'm in fact due to meet the Polish Minister tomorrow to discuss this further, but we have a forward team of Foreign Office officials in Poland precisely to help these cases.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the additional government measures announced today, but will the Foreign Secretary also recognise and indeed encourage the actions of UK individuals and companies who have chosen to dispose of investments and shareholdings in Russian companies, not least the BP's disposal of its stake in Rosneft, which will, of course, come at a substantial cost to its shareholders?
Foreign Secretary.
I do welcome the actions by companies who are dissociating themselves from working with the Putin regime, including BP's divestment.
Malcolm MacDonald.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. We've all witnessed the horrifying war crimes that are taking place against the people of Ukraine, and one would have thought, would they not, that there would at least have been some diplomatic expulsions in coordination with others as a result of that. But the Foreign Secretary sort of dodged a question from my good friend from Rutland and Melton. Is her department working on plans should those war crimes get worse and chemical weapons are deployed against the people of Ukraine?
The answer is yes, we are working on that. We are working very closely with the ICC. The Chief Prosecutor has already issued a statement about the situation in Ukraine, and we are determined that everybody in Russia close to Putin, who is in charge of this appalling invasion, should be aware that they could be prosecuted for war crimes for what they're doing. And of course, on diplomatic expulsions, we don't rule anything out, and we're working closely with our allies.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the Foreign Secretary's robust statement on further sanctions on Russia and strong support for Ukraine. Deliberate misinformation and propaganda are part of Putin's toolbox. So does she agree with me that whilst, of course, we must safeguard and respect free speech, social media companies have a responsibility to ensure they are not propagating lies and must moderate the content on their platforms extremely carefully?
Foreign Secretary.
The honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, is right, and the Culture Secretary is looking very closely at the activities of the social media companies.
Justin Mather.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear the Foreign Secretary is not going to be cowed by letters from oligarchs' lawyers, and she will know that no matter how distasteful we might find it and how damaging it might be to these firms' reputations, even these oligarchs are entitled to legal representation, because that is part of what makes us a free and democratic society. But will she agree with me that the best way to deal with these issues is to ensure that the laws are watertight in the first place? So can she give us an assurance that she's getting the best and the most expert lawyers available to ensure that there are no loopholes that can be exploited?
I can tell the honourable gentleman that the Foreign Office is currently full of lawyers working through precisely this point.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the robust global leadership that the UK has shown against Putin's Russia. The high dependency on Russian energy in parts of Europe has been used by Putin to threaten many of those European countries. So what more can the British government be doing to help support those European countries to reduce that dependency?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm working very closely with my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, on helping those countries reduce their dependence, working with the G7, so over time there is less and less oil and gas and coal imported from Russia, so there is less money to fund Putin's war machine.
Drew Hendry.
Mr Speaker, the public would rightly expect the departments of the Cabinet to be working together at a time like this. The Foreign Secretary said in her statement, "We are also leading on humanitarian support." Yet, fleeing Ukrainian citizens seeking refuge in the UK are being denied entrance because of outdated and restrictive immigration rules. So will the Foreign Secretary urge her Cabinet colleagues to follow the EU nations in waiving visa requirements for Ukrainian citizens for 3 years?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, as I said earlier, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has just announced the new Ukrainian humanitarian route, which does respond directly to these needs.
Mr Speaker, the Foreign Secretary announced the launching of a joint task force to hunt down the assets of oligarchs hit by our sanctions. Can she tell us the speed and scale of which that task force will be set up, and what conversations have been had with the insurance companies who presumably have a list of all the assets and names of the individuals?
Secretary.
Well, this really pertains to a number of questions that have been asked. What we are doing in building up our evidence cases about the oligarchs is sharing information with our G7 allies. So we're working together, we're getting that information quicker. That work is already underway, that task force already exists. And of course, alongside the legal services, the PR services, the accountancy services, we will be looking at the insurance services that these oligarchs rely on. So this is all about being able to do this quicker, because every single country has the same issue. The US take time to build up cases against oligarchs because generally their organisations are so complex and opaque. And the work that my right honourable friend is doing on the economic crime bill will also help making it easier for us to understand their corporate structures.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think all of us, particularly those of us who were members of the House in September 2001, realise that a page has been turned in world history and a new chapter has begun that will resonate not just now, but for many years. And the important thing is that our shared values are the way that we respond in the months and years to come. On the specifics of her statement, she did say over 50% of Russian trade is denominated in dollars or sterling. But so that the House can understand the impact of our government's actions, how much of Russian trade is denominated in sterling?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I don't have that figure on me, but I can get it to the honourable gentleman. The point I was making is the action we've taken on clearing is in conjunction with the United States. So between us, we are able to cover 50% of that trade.
Tricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Foreign Secretary explain why the Russian ambassador to the UK has yet to be dismissed? And will she do all she can to encourage the governments of all Western democracies and the wider international community to similarly dismiss their Russian ambassadors in order to further underscore the isolation of Russia under Putin on the international stage?
Foreign Secretary.
It's very important in all that we do that we work with allies, and coordinated action is vital to send a message to Russia and the rest of the world. And as I've said, nothing is off the table.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I listened to the Foreign Secretary correctly detail the importance of avoiding sanctions leakage, and she was asked twice in this statement about British overseas territories. I detected a reluctance to go into detail on that. If I was wrong, can she please correct me? And if I was right, can she explain why?
Foreign Secretary.
I've been very clear that we will absolutely be including overseas territories in all of these measures we're taking.
Jonathan Edwards.
Diolch, Mr Speaker. The sister of my constituent, Mrs Roach from Coman, has been travelling across Ukraine with her children for 3 days in an attempt to get to the Polish border. So based on what she said earlier, because it's not clear to me, will my constituent's sister and her children qualify as immediate family in order to get obtain access to the UK?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, that is a matter for the Home Office, and I'm very pleased to raise the honourable gentleman's case with the Home Secretary.
Last but not least, Margaret Farrell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The World Health Organization have warned that oxygen supplies are running dangerously low in Ukraine and that they're working with international partners to get urgent shipments through Poland. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm what medical aid the UK government is providing to Ukraine to help them maintain essential services?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I discussed this issue with my Right Honourable friend, the Health Secretary, this morning. We do have a shipment of medical supplies, or rather a cargo of medical supplies, and our Ministry of Defence is helping facilitate that into Ukraine.
We now come to the next statement. Kwatu Tang, Business Secretary.
Well done, well done. Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, sir, I would like to make a statement on reforms the government will be bringing forward to improve transparency over the ownership of companies and property in the UK and to strengthen the enforcement of financial sanctions. These are the key elements of our strategy to tackle dirty money from Russia and from elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, the openness of our economy to investment from all parts of the world is one of our greatest strengths. However, we are equally determined that we want to attract the right kind of investment, and as many people in this House will know, oligarchs and kleptocrats from Russia and elsewhere have used the veneer of legitimacy provided by UK-registered companies and partnerships, and they have also used high-end property to help launder proceeds of corruption. At present, Mr. Speaker, Companies House has very limited powers to prevent this abuse. In light of Russia's outrageous actions in recent days, it is necessary that we put these criminals on notice and send a clear message that the UK will not tolerate their corruption here. So to that end, I am announcing two immediate steps. Firstly, today my department is publishing a white paper on corporate transparency and register reform, and this white paper sets out a comprehensive package of reforms to Companies House. There's a white paper, just stop preempting, just be very patient. The agency will be transformed into a custodian of accurate and detailed information, ensuring that we can clamp down on those who seek to abuse UK corporate structures to launder money. Anyone setting up, running, owning or controlling a company in